For the sixth time in 7 years, the Houston Astros are your AL West division champs. Now, for the sake of sportsmanship, I hope they send an extra bottle of champagne to Seattle. For the sake of rivalry, I really hope they let Hector Neris write the card. It's episode 43 of Stone Cold Stros, and it starts right now. Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. Follow them on X at Palillo, at Josh Jordan 975. Make sure you're reading Charlie's weekly column on sportsmap.com. The full version of this show is available on podcast at places like Apple, Spotify, and more. All those links are in the description. A reminder that the three of us host a weekly Texans podcast called Texans on Tap. You can find that on our new SportsMap Texans YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast provider. Charlie, it's episode 43. Let's highlight an Astros player who wore 43, and there are a few good ones here, so I'm excited to hear who you're shouting out this week.
I shall go with Jim Deshaies, in part not for the number 43 that he wore, but for his years as an outstanding color analyst on Astros television, all those years alongside Bill Brown, but had a solid career, better part of a decade as a pitcher, as a rookie in 1986. Won 12 games, still the Astros franchise record for a rookie pitcher. Went unused in the series against the Mets 37 years later. I know at least a couple people still haven't gotten over that. But I'm going to go Jimmy D with a nod to Ken Forsch, who threw a no-hitter in an Astros uniform wearing number 43. But it's JD for me.
I want to give a shout out to Chris Sampson, whose story almost mirrors that of JP France's. Toiled in the minors for several years, about to give up on baseball, and then was kind of convinced by the wife to stick it out. And then opportunities dictate that they get called up to the big club unexpectedly. And in the case of Sampson, was able to make a short run career out of it. So shout out to Chris Sampson. Guys, let's get right into it. Nobody ever said it'd be easy, but if it were, where'd be the fun in that? Just a week ago, the Astros had about a 26% chance of winning the division. Now, the Astros find themselves with the second best odds to make the World Series behind the Braves. And they will now host the winner of Toronto or Minnesota. It's been a stranger season, so I guess it makes sense and fitting that the least likely outcome was the one that came to fruition here. Let's talk about what we learned in this final stretch of the season. Just how big was the result of the dominoes landing the way that they did?
Well, it's massive, and people can debate home. Would they be better off on the road? Look, for starters, winning the division basically doubles the Astros' chances of getting back to the World Series and defending their championship. It's very simple. You're in that best out of three, and how many times in recent weeks have the Astros demonstrated this? A garbage team can beat a really good team in a 3-game series, so that a good team can beat another good team, or a good team can beat a great team in a best out of 3. At over 162 games, water is ultimately going to find its level. Best out of 3 is largely a dice roll. So is best out of 5. So is best out of 7, but not as much so as best out of 3. So the Astros avoiding that, along with tacking one more division championship banner onto this dynastic run. But the reality is, had the Astros had to go, and even though they've been road warriors, if they would have been at Tampa, they could very easily have been out in 2, or maybe it would have taken 3, wherever they may have wound up, however it fell. But now getting to line up your pitching, be raring to go Saturday against a team that has used up some of its pitching to get to Minute Maid Park to start the division series. That is just colossal. And as my rider to that, I want to say, hey, you're an Astros fan in recent years. Easy was fun being secretariat out in front of the field. But look, if you live and die with it, wasn't this so much more exhilarating and in at least one respect rewarding at the end to get it done the way they got it done? And I would personally also add kind of a pet peeve of mine. Do we need any more proof that momentum is fleeting, ephemeral, and merely a description of how things are in the moment? It can turn at any point. The Astros have had it go up and down and up and down. Well, they picked the right week to have it go ultimately up. I'm not going to say the Rangers choked. In the end, they just gave it up. In Seattle, fighting for its life, coming up a little bit short. The Astros blinked less, and hence they laugh last, which means they laugh best. American League West 2023.
Oh, it feels so good. I don't know about you guys. I'd kind of given up on the thought of winning the division when, things got pretty bleak there. I was just like, just get in the playoffs. That'll be fine. But for things to line up and fall the way they did and to win 5 out of 6 to finish the season, they didn't back into this. They went out and won the games they needed to win. They got a little help, but the help doesn't matter if you don't take care of your own business. And I just have to bring it up. The Rangers broadcast team going after the Diamondbacks for not trying hard enough, and the Rangers couldn't manage to score 1 run with the division on the line. Come on, man. Sure, you would hope that the opponent puts out their best lineup, but you couldn't score 1 run. That's on you, Rangers. Just saying, you gotta own that a little bit there. But I'm thrilled because this is gonna just lay things out nicely. Now the bullpen can rest. I think that's going to be huge. Michael Brantley, it looks like from what we hear, he's going to push through this. He wants to play. He wants to be a part of it. So him getting a little bit of extra rest for that shoulder, I think could pay big dividends. Just letting everybody reset, take a deep breath and regroup. They're feeling good. Sometimes when life falls your way, it gives you a little bit of bounce in your step, a little more confidence. So I couldn't be more happy for how this worked out for them. They deserved it. When it mattered most, they stepped up. They won ball games. They pitched well. The bats came alive, and now they're AL West champions again.
You can't say they weren't challenged either. They didn't coast to the finish line. They played essentially what were playoff games in that last week. And Josh, as you mentioned, won 5 of 6. Considering the way we saw Dusty manage during this final week, and kind of sticking with our theme of what did we learn here, was basically this a preview of how Dusty plans on stacking his lineup during the postseason?
Yeah, the question with Brantley, how often he can go to the post. The division series is favorable in that respect. Right? If it goes the full 5, game 1, game 2, off day. Game 3, game 4, off day. So Brantley can go no more than 2 consecutive games before some soreness creeps in. And then subject to potential matchups, which we'll get to going forward. Dubon coming up with multiple huge hits in September, the single biggest hit of the Astros' entire season, the 3-run homer in Seattle, but the game-winning hit, right, when the Astros were bleeding to the point where, are they going to bleed out? Right, the game they won against the Orioles. Dubon with the game-winning hit there. And so along with Dusty wanting his outfield arm in there with Verlander pitching, I think Dubon has secured himself postseason starts. So there will be decisions to be made, I think, most specifically, Chas or Brantley when facing a right-handed starting pitcher. And the Twins are all right-handed starting pitchers. The Blue Jays do have a couple of lefties who could factor into the mix. Chas obviously over Brantley, or should be obviously, if facing a lefty. Against the righty, the form chart would suggest that Dusty will lean to Brantley if he's feeling right, since they want Jordan basically only DHing.
Yeah, I find it interesting with Chas, just that, we heard the quote from Dana Brown on the flagship about how he hopes they put the best offensive team out there. Chas played in all the games except for that one game in Seattle after he took that, when he got beamed in the back, and then they rested him after that. But outside of that, he played the Diamondbacks games. So I think in that front office, that was the report that he wasn't being played enough. And then Dana drops that little bomb there, and we're seeing a lot of Chas McCormick. So I have to think that's how it'll play out. The starting rotation, I think, will be interesting. How they go about the bullpen, the way Abreu's getting a little more work here in critical situations. It'll be interesting to see what Dusty decides to do.
And credit where it's due. We've had plenty of slander to say about Maldi and Abreu, but Abreu he basically was their only offense through the first 2 games of the Arizona series. And Maldi with some huge defensive plays, and especially in Saturday's game, throwing out the runner in the 9th inning there when you're holding on to a 1-0 lead. Also, why is you're trying to steal when you're trying to just score 1 run to tie the game? Anyway, but Maldi, with a big play. So, shout out to those guys. I also thought it was kind of interesting. We talked a little bit before the show about this. Dana Brown had some comments about hoping Dusty Baker would put his best offensive lineup out there. Now, we did see Chaz play in this last series, which is, I think, why it's important to talk about, is this how Dusty's going to stack his lineup. One guy who we didn't see was Diaz, but Maldi seemed, they did enough on field to where they could kind of fade Maldi's offense. And at times, Maldi did, was able to swing the bat and be impactful in these games. Do we feel good that you have the depth to have Diaz, a player like Diaz or a bat like Diaz, to come off the bench? Or is it still kind of frustrating that you're not putting maybe your best offensive options out there?
Oh, I think overall it's frustrating. You're playing the second best player at the position, the overwhelming majority of the time, presumably going forward. Look, they won 2-1 and 1-0 Friday and Saturday. I'm not giving Maldi the credit for Mensa-level catching as to why they won those games. Urquidy pitched his ass off, and then Verlander backed that up with a tremendous start. So I would want my better player in there the majority of the time. I do want to say slander suggests inaccurate criticism. Abreu overall stunk this year. Yeah. But just as Yordan Alvarez had a stretch where he went 4 for 34, it didn't mean Yordan stunk. It meant he stunk in that stretch. Right? Alex Bregman, yo-yo of a season, where he flourished the final weekend after having been 6 for 51 going into the Seattle series. Abreu overall was a terrible player this year, but he picked the best time to have his best week. Right? He finished with a 680 OPS, which is bad for any player. It's awful for a first baseman, but it's where you end up. And if Abreu, off a near 30 RBI closing month and a day, can carry that over and help lengthen that lineup in the postseason, obviously it augurs well. And Dusty, whether high road or I'm paying attention trying to get back to the World Series here, but don't you think that he was doing a not so slow burn, if apprised, of never manager Dana Brown calling out his decisions the final weekend of the season? Right? The Yiner stuff months ago, okay. Don't know how that sat with Dusty, but I would understand Dusty being furious over this now from Dana Brown.
Yeah, you mentioned Abreu there. We should give him some love over his last 30 games, 250 average, 536 slugging, and 8 home runs. That was the thing where, is the long ball going to be part of his game this year? So we had to wait a long time for it. But if there was a month for him to turn it on, this was the month. So way to go, Jose Abreu. I hope he can carry that into the postseason as well, because they're going to need him, and he's going to be out there. As far as the team, I know we kind of tracked it all year. Astros finished 5th in team OPS for the season, and they finished 8th in team ERA. So, we saw it bounce throughout the course of the season. They were middle of the pack a lot of the way. So to finish there, 5th and 8th in offense and defense, or in offense and in pitching, that's pretty good. That's kind of what you would expect out of the Astros. So I'm really excited that they were able to do that. Just shows you a lot of balance right there with them, because when they do go play the Jays and the Twins, they're really high up in these categories too. They're Twins are 7th in OPS, and they are 6th in ERA. Blue Jays 11th in OPS. Blue Jays, 4th in ERA. So it's a pretty even. Whichever matchup they get, it's going to be pretty even for the Astros.
Look, this is the weakest full season Astros team since the dynasty started in 2017. But the point all along was to get in the tournament and then hope you play the best ball over those 3-4 weeks of the postseason. And the bonus coming that they were able to do it and steal the division the last day of the year to avoid that shotgun round best of 3. So now for all the analysis and assessing strengths and weaknesses, you just go out and play. Only 1 out of every 4 years on average in the wild card era does the best team in a given season over 162 games wind up winning the World Series. The structure of baseball allows for routineness of upsets. Best of 3, best of 5, best of 7. The Atlanta Braves are quite clearly the best team in the major leagues this year. But that they're better than even money to win the World Series? No way.
And you don't get prizes for having the best team in the postseason. You get the prizes for winning games in the postseason, because the 2019 Astros always have something to remind us there. Just to kind of close out on this topic, we've understandably made comparisons between Abreu and Yuli Gurriel all season, just because one replaced the other. But man, we saw what Yuli Gurriel could do with some rest once they got to the postseason. If Abreu's hitting like this in combination with getting some rest, assuming that too much rest doesn't cause rust in his case, but as a professional hitter and a guy who may have a back that's barking at him at this point, to get some extra rest for a guy like him and Josh, as you mentioned, Michael Brantley, who really could use that, man, that's so big for them, because that's all you're hoping for. You were just hoping to get into the postseason, to get to the dance, and hope that the majority of your guys are healthy. And that's been something they have struggled with all season. And for Abreu and Brantley to be available to you at this point of the season, and to get rest to where they're not having to play in these games this week, so huge. You can't overstate the meaning in that. That's going to be it for for part 1 of this episode. To listen to the full podcast, it's up right now at your favorite podcast provider. And to watch the full conversation here on YouTube, check out the Stone Cold Stros playlist. We'll be releasing those videos very shortly. And as always, go Stros.